I'm sharing this story because I can't forget about it, and it keeps coming back. I love my husband so much, and I hold him in very high regards. But sometimes having a male friend can sometimes bring some uncertainty and trust issues in a relationship. I am also not a saint. I have my fair share of flaws, and I have done my husband wrong. We should have sat down as adults and discussed everything and not act irrational like he did at first. I need advice, what I should do in this situation. How do I deal with this? And please give me tips for future purposes so I won't repeat the same mistake again. My husband, male 26, and I, female 25, met on social media, on Facebook to be specific. He had sent me a friend request one day, and usually I do not accept friend requests from people I do not know. But that day, as I was scrolling through my phone, all bored and cooped up in the house, I found myself accepting his request. Not before I checked his account, and if he was a catfish or a real person, after I had confirmed that I accepted his request. Within any minutes, the guy sent me an inbox message on Facebook Messenger. So as we were chatting, he complimented my pictures and told me that he had seen my location, since I would usually put my location whenever I post my pictures, and my bio mentioned that I lived in Island Bridge and Parkgate Place apartments. He told me that he lived in Bellevue, which was about 18 minutes walk and 4 minutes drive away. We continued chatting. He was actually a very fun person. So as we were in the same town, he asked to meet up with me at least. A few days later, we met at Rai's Chinese takeaway restaurant that had recently opened around the corner. When we met, he was actually finer than in the pictures. Not to say he was ugly in the pictures or something. He was handsome, very handsome, but seeing him live. We were already friends. He was a good listener and a very good advisor to have. He was a very fun person to be around with. Our energies clicked, We got along very well. But there was one thing that I had noticed about him was that he had a very short temper, and you had to be careful of what you say to him, even if it's a joke. And another thing, it was like he had some kind of trust issues. He was not a very trusting person. I once asked him about his trust issues and temper. He told me his story about his ex-girlfriend who had made him take responsibility of a child that was not his, and the story about his parents, that his mother was not faithful to his father, and a lot would happen in the house, which somehow led to violence in front of him. That was when he had developed trust issues and a very short temper. When he told me his story, I couldn't believe it, and I promised to be there for him no matter what, and that I would never betray him, at least not intentionally. A month later, he confessed his feelings for me. I had also developed some feelings for him. He was what my soul needed, The chemistry and the spark was there, so the relationship was formed. He would tell me that he loved me every single minute he got, and would make me promise that I would never betray him. From there, I knew that my baby needed help. Maybe some therapy would help him. So I tried talking to him about seeking help, but he bluntly refused and told me that he would never speak to a person he doesn't know about his problems. Men and their egos sometimes, so I just let him be. We worked so hard to fix the issues that he had, but eventually we conquered it all. I was grateful for the fact that he had allowed me to help him get through everything and somehow be able to forgive and move on. So after a year later, we got married, and it was the best day of our lives. Since we both had no parents or any relatives of some sort, we celebrated our big day with friends and colleagues. I grew up in a foster home, so I don't really know if my parents are still alive or not, and it always saddens me that I had grown up in a foster home without any trace or names of my parents. It's like they had never existed, But life has to move on, right? And besides, we can't always worry ourselves about people who never bothered to look for us, who actually forgot that they had or have children. Anyway, enough about my somber and boring story. So after Frank and I got married, he was a changed man. He was ready to be a family man, His tempers had gone down, and I was very much happy with the changes. Our house was full of happiness and love. Even our intimate moments were on another level. I was a happy woman. I lacked nothing. From love, happiness, handsome husband, beautiful home, and everything, but I don't really know what had come over me to destroy all of that good thing. So I had a male best friend that I had actually taken as my brother. Kristen and I were in a foster home together. By grace and his luck, he was adopted by some rich parents, but later reunited with his father. So life was fortunate for me, and that was how we lost each other. but later reunited when we were both in university. I was so happy to get a chance to be united with Kristen again. Since then, we became inseparable. Frank, my husband, had his own doubts about my friendship with Kristen, but I would always assure him that there was nothing more that was going on between us. It was just a purely brother and sister relationship. Not knowing that I was just fooling my mind and Frank's mind, Kristen actually had his own thoughts about our friendship relationship. And it didn't end very well because I betrayed one person who was able to accept me into his world and heart and make me his without feeling insecure about it. And what did I do to appreciate that? I acted like a loose witch. I hate myself sometimes for what I did. I regret it. After a year of being married to Frank, we started talking about having kids. Well, it was also my dream to have kids with Frank. But I first wanted to boost my modeling career, so I asked if we would wait a little because at that time I had entered for Miss Ireland competition. He had his career and life all figured out. And I also wanted that, He had already had a legacy, an inheritance, but I didn't. And when I told him my reason to that, he got angry, of which confused me because despite that, he wanted to start a family. And I wanted that too, but he didn't understand my reasons of wanting to wait maybe another year of starting a family. And I didn't understand why. I mean, what was the rush? It wasn't like I would be in the competition forever, That modeling competition news was not sitting well with him. I don't know if it was maybe because I was working with Kristen most of the time since he was a photographer, so he was the one who would usually take pictures of me. I tried reasoning with him that modeling was what I love. It had started as more of a hobby, and I started loving it to a point that I had even thought of pursuing a career in the industry. Yes, I was working as a receptionist in one of the law firms in Dublin, name withheld due to personal reasons, but it wasn't something I had dreams to be in. So Frank became distant and would sometimes not come back home. I didn't know if the reason why his behavior had changed towards me was because of me wanting to pursue my modeling career, or because he had his own things that he was not telling. But I had put that aside because I trusted my husband, and I knew that he wouldn't do me dirty or do something that would destroy and jeopardize what we were trying to build. He loved me too much to put our relationship in jeopardy. But instead, I was the one who had put our relationship and marriage in the state where it is now. I wonder what really came over me. One sunny weekend, Frank came back home in the afternoon. Mind you, he had been gone for 3 days without even bothering to call me. I asked where he was coming from. The answer I got was, "I am trying to pursue my career also, since you don't want us to start a family." That response shook me because I didn't expect it from him. He was slowly going back to being his old short-tempered self. I wondered what had driven him back to that state that we had worked so hard to conquer, but I just let it slide and hoped that he would tell me when he was ready. During that time when my husband was busy acting up, I started spending more time with Kristen. Well, Kristen was what I can call a great time passer. He helped me pass time when my husband was super distant from me and our marriage. I was going through a lot, I knew my husband loved me, but his behavior was stressing me out, to a point that I would even find myself venting in Kristen. I know it was wrong of me to just put my marital problems out there or share them with a friend or an outsider, but I needed someone to vent to, and Kristen was there and available. Time passed. I continued spending more time with Kristen, up until Frank saw that I was no longer staying at home for long. He figured that I was spending time with Kristen, so he asked why I was spending more time with Kristen. And the stupid Casey myself lied and told him that Kristen and I were preparing for the Miss Ireland competition, so that was why I had been with Kristen most of the time as my photographer, of course. I knew he didn't believe me, but there was no evidence that showed that there was something going on between Kristen and I. But I knew that there was actually something going on between Kristen and I. I just couldn't tell my insecure and short-tempered husband that during the time when he was an absent husband to me. I had found solace in Kristen because he was there to listen to my venting sessions, and he was what I can call a shoulder to cry on. So, as I was busy venting on Kristen, I didn't know that he had his own agenda. He actually pretended to be my brother, my best friend, and my shoulder to cry on. Weeks later, as my husband was busy pulling his stunts, Kristen and I kissed. I managed to break it at first and reminded him that I was a married woman and I shouldn't have done what I did. Instead of respecting my decisions, the guy just poured his heart to me, telling me how much he had thought him and I would actually end up together, married and having kids. His confession confused the tea out of me, because I had thought our relationship was of a brother and I, but he actually saw a life partner to me. I mean, he had all the time in the world to tell me that when I was single and available, so why would he confess when I was married and during the time when my marriage was going through a patch? After that, I couldn't face him for like a week. Then he came back. Well, he came to my house. He actually came to apologize and blamed his confession to the alcohol that we were drinking that day. As a person that I had thought was my best friend, my brother, I forgave him and gave him another chance to continue where we had left off. Not knowing that the vulture was actually back for me, I don't know how and what I can call it, but he actually destroyed my marriage. And another thing, Frank had told me several times to stay away from Kristen because he had started acting like an obsessed person, but I didn't listen. But instead I gave him the benefit of the doubt and thought that my husband was looking at things out of proportion. I thought he was exaggerating, you know. I knew that he didn't like my friendship relationship with Kristen from the day I introduced them to each other, and I used that to close Frank's judgments towards Kristen. So one day my husband and I had a very heated argument about the fact that I wanted to wait for a year to start a family or have kids. That day he lashed out on me to a point that he even told me that he had thought I was different from his ex-girlfriend, and he had thought I knew what I wanted when I first got into relationship with him and agreed to marry him. He even asked if I was cheating on him with Kristen since I was always with him. After that heated argument, he went out to only God knows where. I was so heartbroken by what he said. His words were stuck in my head to a point that I found myself calling Kristen and asked to spend the night with him, as friends of course, of which he agreed. I was in mixed emotions. I didn't know what to do with myself, you know. My other side was angry at Frank for comparing me with his ex, and his words were like a deep stab in my heart. I was also frustrated at the fact that he didn't understand my reasons for why I wanted to pursue my career first before having any children. So that night, as I went to Kristen's flat, he automatically knew what I had needed, and that was alcohol. We drank. I wanted to numb the pain I was feeling inside my heart and forget everything that Frank had said earlier on. So drinking like a fish was the only option I had. Kristen decided to offer me a weed joint that we smoked together. And it did make a trick because most of the things I did or said there I don't really remember. So we smoked and drank. I was having the best time of my life with my ex-male best friend. As we were having fun, I felt a sense of peace and belonging, and one thing led to another. I remember kissing Kristen. The music he was playing made me miss the intimate sessions I would have with my husband, which somehow changed from fire to ice. Ever since he wanted to start expanding the family and I didn't agree, his intimacy game dropped to the ground, and I was suffering. You know, the weed was in my head, the alcohol fully in my system, as we were kissing with Kristen. Things got heated to a point that clothes started flying and we couldn't hold ourselves, so we did the deed. The next morning came and regret came crashing over me. I realized what I had done and left Kristen's house like I was chased by dogs. I was scared that Frank would find out, and what I did somehow made me think that what he said when he compared me to his ex-girlfriend was somehow true, and it did eat me up. I didn't know what to do with myself. I wished to just go to the ocean or to the river Liffey so I can wash away the sin that I had committed. I realized that I had put my marriage in jeopardy, all because I couldn't give my husband what he wanted and ended up finding solace to drugs that led me to be unfaithful to my husband. Days later, Frank had been home, and he apologized for how had behaved and told me that he didn't mean to compare me to his ex. But he was under pressure because he really wanted to have children and build his own family since he doesn't have one. I understood his reasoning, but the guilt was there, you know. I mean, how you tell your husband that you have cheated. And I prayed that Kristen doesn't say anything or do anything stupid that would make Frank find out about my abomination and shame that I had done. Little did I know that the bastard had captured every moment of that night. So about a week later, I received mail, which was very odd because all communications are done technologically nowadays, so I took the mail, wanting to find out what it was. Maybe it would have been my parents finally reaching out, not knowing that it was a very big and destructive bomb. As I opened the mail, I found the letter written, "The night I would never forget, I hope we do it again soon." And it was from Kristen. I got the shock of my life as to why would Kristen do this to me. My heart was beating too fast, thoughts running through my head. I was asking myself, what if Frank was the one who got the mail and he saw the pictures and a letter that Kristen had sent? I sent Kristen a text right away and broke everything off with him. I wanted nothing to do with him because he had started acting like a psycho. As I was busy, lost in my thoughts, I heard the car door opening and I knew that it was Frank. So I took the mail along with everything that Kristen had put in the mail and threw it in a trash can. When Frank came in, he found me drinking wine like I was drinking water, and he knew that if I drank wine like that, I would either be under pressure or something was bothering me. And that time, I had forgotten that it was the day that Frank would take out trash. I was in so much stress. I told Frank that it was nothing to worry about, and I left him there in the kitchen and went to the bedroom. My mind came back later that it was the day that Frank had to take out the trash. I rushed to the kitchen and found out that the trash can was empty. I looked for Frank and found him in the sitting room, looking at the pictures that Kristen had sent, and the letter was beside him. I knew there and then that I was in deep shit. I knew that my marriage was over. Frank couldn't even look me in the eyes. He was furious, and I knew what was going to come next when he was like that. His eyes were full of rage, hatred, and hurt. I had hurt my husband and destroyed my marriage in the most humiliating way. I hated myself and still do hate myself for that. But I had to try and explain why I had done what I did and apologize, right? So the next day, when I had seen that he was no longer enraged like he was the previous night, I asked to speak to him. I was glad that as much as his tempers kept coming back, but he was not violent, well, at least towards me. So I explained everything to him from point A to point Z. I tried making him understand that I didn't do what I did on purpose, and it wasn't my intention to destroy what we had. Instead of listening to me, he went to our bedroom and took out all my clothes. I knew the words he wanted to say already, so I decided to not fight him, but apologize and give him some space, with the hope that he would calm down and let us fix things. I mean, we were both wrong. Yes, he didn't cheat on me, or at least I didn't know or had the evidence that he was really not cheating on me, but we were both wrong, and we had to come to terms with our mistakes and fix them like a married couple, you know? I love my husband a lot, and being away from him made me realize how naive and careless I was to do what I did to him. About 2 months later, Frank came to my apartment and asked that we could talk, so I agreed. Both of us confessed everything. Well, more like I confessed everything that I was doing with Kristen. He also confessed that he had been staying at his apartment because he wanted to be away from me. He confessed that his actions were selfish, but what he had discovered about me really broke him. We said a lot to each other, and he listened attentively. I think he understood the damage his mistrust had caused, the pain he had inflicted upon me. As I was torn between the love I felt and the betrayal I had endured, I decided to give Frank a chance. I mean, I was the one who made the big mistake here, so it was only fair to stay and fix our relationship. I recognized that his suspicions had stemmed from his own insecurities and fears, rather than any wrongdoing on my part. I agreed to work on rebuilding our relationship, but only if we both committed to healing and regaining the trust we had lost. With the help of a couples therapist, we embarked on a journey of self-reflection and open communication. We learned to address our insecurities, to listen to one another's fears, and to rebuild the foundation of trust that had crumbled. Our love began to heal, but scars remained. Frank is now acutely aware of the cost of suspicion and mistrust. He vowed to be more understanding and open in our relationship. While I am still carrying the pain of the accusations and betrayal I had done, I chose to forgive, recognizing that rebuilding trust would take time and effort from both of us. We learned that love requires vulnerability, honesty, and a willingness to confront one's own fears and insecurities. We sought a new beginning. My husband and I love each other so much, and I believe that we will heal and be able to move on from everything. I don't know how to be free again without making my husband suspect that I would be doing something to destroy our marriage again. Please help me with advice and tips. No judgments, please. The one very mistake I made ruined my life and my marriage. I didn't know that this mistake could mess things up for me. My husband caught me with his boss, and he didn't think twice before taking out his revenge on me. I take full accountability for my actions, but he just went too far with his revenge. He shouldn't have acted the way he did. His revenge was just too cruel. My husband perfectly planned everything and waited for me to fall right into his trap. I fell for it, and now I'm reaping the consequences. Hi guys, my name is Patricia, and I am a 27-year-old fast food owner. The name of my husband is Michael. He is a 30-year-old business analyst. My husband and I had been married for 3 years, but unfortunately, we're no longer together. We have known each other for a very long time. Michael was 18 years old when he and his family moved into our neighborhood. At that time, I was 15 years old. Practically, Michael and I were childhood friends. Michael and his family moved into the town at that time because they had transferred his father for work. And so, he wasn't familiar with the neighborhood. At some point then, both of us parents got closer together and made friends. But Michael and I had our own little differences and often argued over little things. Something seemed off with Michael at that time. He was not like the usual kids. He didn't like playing or associating with friends. He was always reading even when it was a holiday. Honestly speaking, Michael was an introvert. Few months after Michael and his family had moved in, Michael and I later got along. We became friends and spent time together whenever his family came over for dinner. We even attended the same high school down to college. We never dated during that period. We were just friends and neighbors. 2 years after graduation from college, Michael asked me out. I patiently waited to be his girlfriend. I liked Michael back then, but I didn't tell him because I didn't want to be turned down, and also we weren't friends. I accepted and we dated for a year before we finally tied the knot together. The wedding was memorable, and I felt like I had made the best decision at that time. We were in love with each other. So guys, a few months after our wedding, everything moved fine, and we lived happily. We were an average couple then because we were just trying to figure out something meaningful with our lives. We planned to not take any financial assistance from our parents, and we survived each day. At that time, our parents' relationship became stronger because of our union. Despite everything then, Michael treated me nice. We went on regular dates, and he also bought me gifts. He never gave me a chance to look outside or even regret marrying him. That even brought us closer together. 1 year after our wedding, Michael got promoted at his office. He gave professional advice to the company he was working with, and also was made a personal assistant to his boss. After Michael's promotion, everything went well and we lived happily. I also opened a fast food restaurant with the help of Michael. He supported my business and came over to help me out with work anytime he was work-free. It wasn't an easy start. The first few months were challenging, but I overcame all the challenges with the help of Michael. My husband also referred his colleagues to the restaurant to either have breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and they all did. One day, while I was at the restaurant sorting out the sales for the day, I got a call from Michael's mom, Trisha. I quickly picked the call and we exchanged our usual greetings. Michael's mom and I were very close. She treated me more like a daughter-in-law. Apparently, Trisha gave birth to Michael and 3 other boys, and so she took me like the daughter she never had. So guys, after our usual greetings, she told me that she was trying to plan a surprise for Michael Dad's 60th birthday. She told me that she wanted an extra hand, and I was the perfect person that would help her carry out the surprise. I was excited and told her how happy I was to help out. So I got off the phone and headed over to the house later that day. We made the necessary arrangement and set out the things we needed for the surprise. Everyone knew about the surprise except for Michael's dad, Dave. Trisha gave out a strict warning to all of us, and we all complied. 3 days later, it was Michelle's dad's birthday. The surprise really came out good. There were lots of drinks and food to eat. Everyone came with gifts, and it was a nice birthday party. Michael and I also gave him a very thoughtful gift. We all had fun. It was indeed a wonderful night, and everyone enjoyed themselves. The party ended at 10 p.m., and everyone exited the venue. My husband and I drove home together that night, and we headed to bed straight because we had a tired night. The next day, I woke up and turned to the other side of the bed, but I didn't find Michael as usual. He must have woken up early to go to work. I got out of bed and prepared myself to go to the restaurant. I did my morning routine and left home. I arrived at the restaurant and I saw that there were a lot of orders waiting for us. My workers and I got to work and we cleared it out. Not long after we had opened, my husband walked in with his boss, Raphael. His boss wanted to have breakfast at the restaurant that morning. My husband's boss had come over several times to have food at the restaurant. There were times he came and had food with his clients. I was used to having him around. So guys, I took out his order and one of my workers, Kate, served him. My husband also had breakfast with his boss. I sat at a corner and watched them eat. They kept talking about business, and at some point I didn't really understand what they were really discussing at that moment. A few minutes later, they were done and were ready to head out of the restaurant. Raphael left a huge tip for me because of how tasteful the food was. I declined at first, but he seemed persistent. And also, I looked at my husband to see if he was okay with it. But Michael didn't bother, and I collected it. I was very happy, and I thanked him for his generosity. We left the restaurant, and so I walked them to the car. They got into the car and drove off. Then I walked back into the restaurant and continued my work. 2 months later, it was our 3rd-year wedding anniversary. I got up very early that morning before Michael. Apparently, I had been planning on surprising him. A few minutes later, he got up. We exchanged our greetings and we told ourselves happy anniversary. I was very happy that he remembered despite his busy schedules. We got dressed and we went to our place of work. So guys, I got early from work that day because I wanted to surprise my husband. Of course, it was our 3rd year as a couple. I called him on the phone and told him to come back early, which he assured me he would. I went home and made a nice meal for her. I wanted us to have dinner at home. I did everything and lighted the candles. It was a romantic dinner date just for the 2 of us. Not long after, my husband arrived home, and I waited at the door for him to come. Immediately, he opened the door and I yelled, "Surprise!" He was so happy to see that I had taken time to celebrate our anniversary. We hugged and headed to the dining table. Apparently, my husband got me a gift when he was coming from work. We exchanged our gifts and professed our love to each other. We then proceeded and ate our meal. We cleared the table after we had our meal and went to watch our favorite TV shows. And after a while, I slept off. I couldn't watch the movie until the end because I was very tired. The next morning, I woke up and found myself on the bed. Michael must have had a hard time taking me upstairs. I thought to myself and laughed. As usual, my husband had left early to work. I decided not to go to work that day because I wanted to visit my parents. I haven't heard from them for a while then because I was so busy with work that I hardly had time for myself. I called Michael and informed him I would be going to see my parents. He said okay and told me to come back early, which I agreed to. I went to the bathroom and had my bath, got dressed, and left. I didn't bother informing them because I was very sure they were going to be at home. Plus, I wanted my visit to be a surprise. I arrived at my parents' house 15 minutes later. Yes, it was a 15-minute journey. We were that close to each other. I got out of my car and headed to the door. I knocked a few times, but no one opened the door. Everywhere was silent and I wondered what could be wrong. I still remembered the passcode and I went inside. I got in and no one was at home and everything was neatly put in place. I took my phone and called my dad, but his lines were off. At that moment, I was scared and had bad thoughts running through my mind. I called my mom, and after a few rings, she picked the phone. I asked her if everything was okay and why they weren't at home, but she said all was fine and told me not to bother myself about anything. Apparently, they went to visit a friend of theirs a few miles away from the neighborhood. So, guys, I was happy that nothing happened. Before I got off the phone with my mom, I told her I would wait for them to come back, and so I waited. A few hours later, they arrived home. I was very happy to see them, and we chatted for a while before I left and headed back home. By the time I arrived home, it was a few minutes past 6, and Michael hadn't come back at that time. I called him, and he told me he was a few minutes away from home. I went inside and freshened up and went downstairs. I thought about the things me and my mom had chatted about, and I felt happy. I had really missed them. Sometimes I feel like I haven't done enough for them. I was reminiscing about the fun I had with my mom when Michael walked in. I was startled at first because he didn't knock on the door as usual. Maybe I must have forgotten to lock it. We greeted each other and we asked ourselves about our day before he went upstairs to change. Immediately, I left to set his dinner, and I continued with what I was doing. A few minutes later, he came down to eat his meal and went back to the room. I was very curious about it because it was unlike him, and so I got up and asked him if everything was okay. He told me that he was just tired from the day's work, and so he came back to lie down. Honestly speaking, at that time he looked very tired. I also joined him in bed and we rested for the night. Michael's behavior continued for a couple of weeks, and I was becoming fed up with his constant mood swings. I decided to pressure him into telling me what was wrong with him. After much persuasion, he told me that he had been overworked by his boss for the past few months, and I was very surprised because he had told me they were not very busy at that time of the year. He then explained to me about them expanding their business and all. I saw the work was taking a huge toll on my husband, and I decided I was going to do something about it. The following day, I made up my mind that I was going to speak to Michael's boss, Raphael. I know I made the decision to do that on my own, but I needed to do something about it because my husband was grinding himself to the ground, and I knew he was not going to say anything to his boss because he loved what he did, i.e. his work. I was in the restaurant 2 days later when Michael called me about a work trip he was going on at the last minute, and I saw it as an opportunity for me to go pay his boss, Raphael, a visit. I knew I was doing the right thing because it was for the welfare of my husband. I quickly finished what I was doing and I left for their office. I got there, and every time I come here, I am very much in awe about the organization of the offices. I told his assistant I was here to see her boss, but she told me I didn't have an appointment. I tried explaining to her that I know him, but she couldn't listen to me. I gave up hope, and I was about to leave when I saw Raphael coming out from his office with a man. I quickly ran to him, and I told him about how I wanted to see him, and I didn't have an appointment. He apologized to me, and he ushered me into his office. I sat down, and I got straight to the point with him. I told him about Michael's recent poor health and how he had been overworking himself lately. Raphael put me at ease about everything, and he told me he was going to cut back Michael's working hours. At that point, I became very scared, thinking that I may have jeopardized his work, but he quickly told me that cutting back his hours doesn't mean Michael was going to lose his job. I felt relieved because I knew Michael was going to be upset if he found out that I paid his boss a visit without his knowledge. I told Raphael not to mention my visit to Michael. He agreed, and he walked me out of his office with his hand on my lower back. I felt some type of way, because he shouldn't have done that because I was the wife of his employee, and I thought they had some sort of friendship. After leaving the office, I went back home and called Michael. We talked for some time, and I found out he was feeling much better, and also he was extending his trip for a little while because his boss gave him time to rest. But I asked why he couldn't rest at our home. He replied and said he needed to be away from the city for a few weeks. I agreed to it because it can get really intense with the work they do. We said our goodbyes and I got into bed. Things were moving swiftly, guys. My husband was fine where he was and my business was moving forward. I was at the restaurant when Raphael came in with a group of men in suits. I assumed they were from his work. I asked someone to take their other and I continued with my work some hours later. I thought I should leave early and go see Trisha for a while. I was about to leave when I saw Raphael still in the restaurant, but that time he was alone. I went over to say hello, and he asked me to join him for a drink, which I accepted because I didn't want to seem rude to him. We talked about random things, and I discovered that Raphael was actually a very interesting person. He told me how he worked so hard from an early age, and because he was from a rich family, he had to work extra hard. I also told him about how Michael had worked his way up to be where he is today. I also told him it was one of the things I admired about my husband. I admired his dedication. I finished up my drink and I told Raphael I was meeting Michael's mom for dinner and I had to leave. He offered to drive me since it was late and I accepted. We talked on the way and I saw that I had misjudged Raphael because he was actually a very funny and easygoing guy behind the suits and the serious face he carried. He was so easy to talk to. He dropped me off, and we said our goodbyes. I greeted Trisha, and she kept on saying she hadn't seen me in months. I knew she exaggerated a lot, but months. We laughed over it, and we talked about Michael's recent trip, and she had asked me how I was doing without him. I told her I was coping fine. We ate, and we gossiped for a little while before I went back home. When I got home, I went straight to bed, and I made a mental note to talk to my parents the following day. I woke up the next day ready to get to work when Michael called me that his boss was coming over to the house to get some particular documents he had left behind. I knew that I was already going to be running late for work, and I decided to wait for Raphael. I was finishing up my breakfast when I heard the doorbell. I knew it was Raphael, and I invited him in. I gave him the documents, and he handed me my pair of earrings I left in his car last night. I thanked him, and I was about to lead him to the door when he begged me to make a cup of coffee for him. I agreed to do so because he was really a nice person, and he was just asking for me to do little. We continued to bond over the coffee, and Raphael kept flirting with me, and at first, I never saw it as anything serious, but it kept coming. He could tell me I was beautiful, and Michael was lucky to have me. It never meant anything to me, and I decided to overlook it. A few days later, Raphael kept visiting my restaurant, and he kept on flirting with me. There were days he could enter the restaurant and sit for hours watching me work and waiting for me to finish my work. In those days, I found the sweet side of Raphael. I got into the restaurant one morning, and I saw a bunch of flowers waiting for me on my desk. I looked at the card and discovered it was from Raphael. It brightened my day, and a few minutes later, I received a call from Raphael, and we talked, and he made me laugh throughout our conversation. I had to end the call because I was getting another call from my husband. I spoke to my husband not feeling guilty because I thought what was going on between me and Raphael was not that important, and there was no need for me to worry him over it. I talked to Michael about when he was coming back because I missed him, to which he said he had returned in a week's time. I was very excited because finally he was coming back and I was not going to be lonely again. A day later, Raphael asked how long it was since I went out for dinner, and I couldn't remember, to which he suggested we go out for a friendly dinner. I accepted because I thought it was harmless and all. And since it was going to take a few days before Michael returned, I decided to take him up on his offer. I got dressed and Raphael picked me up. I didn't know how he knew my favorite restaurant, but I was happy to be there. We ate and talked for a while. With Raphael, it was very easy to communicate because he always puts you at ease. I checked my time and I discovered time had passed and there were only a few people remaining at the restaurant. At that point, I was very tipsy. Raphael offered to drop me home, but I had to decline because it was really late and I didn't want to be driven for a long time. I told him to find me a hotel to sleep for the night and I could go home in the morning, but he suggested I could sleep in his guest room. I accepted and he drove us to his house. We got to his house and I knew I was tipsy because I couldn't see properly, and Raphael helped me change my clothes. One thing led to the other, and we started kissing. I didn't know what was going on in my head, but I wanted it to happen, and that was the last thing I remember before everything went blank. I woke up the next morning with a mild headache to see that I was in a strange place. Before I could make out where I was, I heard the voice of my husband, and the next thing was him standing at the door, looking at me horribly. I turned to the left and I saw Raphael naked on the bed. I saw a lot of pain in Michael's eyes and I knew I was in trouble. I left the room without a word and I tried to get dressed and run after him, but Raphael held me back and told me to allow him to be for some time. I felt like it was not a good idea, and I got dressed quickly and went looking for Michael only to see he had left. I looked for a cab and went home looking for him, but he was not there. I kept on trying to reach Michael, but he was not answering me, and some days later, Raphael came by to the restaurant, and I asked him if he knew where Michael had gone. But he didn't know I was getting irritated at that point because I wanted him to come face me and let us talk things through. A few days later, I woke up ready to start my day, and I decided not to think about everything for once and put myself first. I got to work, but my restaurant was closed. I was shocked because my employees are always early to work, and we don't close the restaurant at that hour of the morning. I got a paper served to me saying I was no longer the owner of my business because it had been sold. I thought it was a very good joke, and I started laughing because I didn't see how it was possible. I decided to call Michael because he was the only one who could understand how I was feeling, but I couldn't reach him. I called Raphael, and he came as soon as he could. I gave him the papers with my hands shaking. Then Raphael told me after that Michael, being the legal owner of my restaurant, had sold it. I didn't want to believe him at first because I knew Michael wasn't that cruel. But I remembered what I did to him, and I couldn't hold my tears. My whole life's work had been thrown into the drain by Michael. That was the cruelest thing to do to anyone. I got home to see my things were outside with Michael standing at the door with the divorce papers. I begged him to listen to me, and I tried explaining to him that the house was mine too. But he said he had bought the house in his name. That's all he did to me. I can't believe he turned out to be a ruthless man. I'm still trying to process all that he did to me. Update. I've seen the comments, and I must say that you all are really cruel. None of you wanted to leave any stone unturned, and you made sure you crushed my pride. I guess I deserve it all. I cannot believe that I've ended up as a divorced woman who has lost everything. I thought things would charge, and I'd get back everything I've lost, but nothing like that happened. It's all gone, and it's as a result of my stupidity. At that moment, everything came crashing down on me. I had lost my restaurant, which I built with some much sweet, and I also lost my marriage, and I was homeless. It became clear to me that Michael was a cruel person who never thought of anybody but himself. This is everything he did to me, guys. I don't think I can ever recover from it. But I guess karma dealt with me.